history, at least in human history, in the last, say, 13,000 years, since the last nuclear war, which we have chemical evidence of in Azerbaijan, India, in Yemen, and Saudi Arabia. What's happening in Fukushima Daiichi is almost like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's crazy. The latest thing they're doing, they're putting some kind of concrete in around a part of reactor number 3. What's the story? What's happening over there?
Well, very similar to what was accomplished or tried to, let's put it this way, they tried to accomplish the minimizing of the leakage, because Fukushima, all the sites are actually a sieve, and everything is leaking out that's being pumped in, and it comes out in highly contaminated form, liquid mostly. And there is a trench that has pipes in it. It's very, very common to have a concrete pipe trench, and a lot of the water just cracks in it, and there's a lot of water that's getting into that, and it just goes straight shot right to the ocean.
Right.
In fact, and they're trying to seal this up, just as they tried to seal up Unit 2, and Unit 2 is still leaking. And this is from an article. This is from TEPCO's. Where did I send this one from? This is a TEPCO article. This is the Japan's NRA own words had recently announced that that's the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, has announced that they assume the plant is still leaking out to sea and possibly beneath the wall, blocking efforts at the plant. So this effort to concrete in Unit 3 trench had not been previously announced. This is actually unusual, because usually they've been announcing work well in advance and got it on a schedule so everybody could see what was happening. This is something that was unannounced, and that's kind of irregular to say, hey, listen, you know what? We got to make an emergency fix to something here. So you know that there's something going on. And
and of course, Box Reactor 3 is the most dangerous of them, because it's the one where it's mixed oxygen reactor fuel, so it contains the highest concentrations of plutonium, which, because of the way the reactor is designed, it can be up to 33,000 times higher concentration than the reactor fuel rods and pellets from any of the other plants. Right?
Well, in a news release just this week, it looks like they are not going to get a lot of funding for MOX from the Department of Energy, as they had asked for in the budget. Not that means a whole lot, but it means they're shaving off a few of the program in terms of dollars spent on it.
What's this concrete trench that they're talking about? Because you sent me this article. What does it mean?
Well, what it means is that water is leaking. Okay, specifically, it means that water coming from inside containment, going through the core to cool it, picks up a lot of contaminants from inside containment. It leaks out through cracks in concrete, and also in pipes that we've already seen that are leaking out, collecting in the lowest point in the plant, which would be in the trench or down. They call it the basement. It's not really a basement. It's really a lower elevation of the plant, and then leaking into this pipe trench, which goes and has carries pipes that go down to the sea, and what happens is the water goes around these pipes on the outside down into the concrete, and eventually it leaks out into the sea. The pipes are actually meant to support cooling water from the waterfront area. The parts that failed immediately due to being covered over by the waves, the tsunamis. So it's important to minimize the leakage or stop the leakage, but it's not able to be accomplished with any kind of effectiveness. And it looks like they're trying to scramble, because they're finding high levels of contamination leaking in that flow path. It's a flow path.
Right. Now, of course, the real big story is not just that one. The first story that you gave, which is particularly disturbing, and it's an action taken by the United States and Russia against a move by a collective of nations that are concerned about safety standards around nuclear plants around the world. And the United States and Russia don't want these standards to be increased to make sure that they have better legal standards for boosting global nuclear safety. The two countries that are proliferating more than anybody, the United States and Russia, with we call the Rosatom system that the Russians have. They sold, just to South Africa alone in the last year, 8 nuclear reactors to be built over the next 5 years. The Russians have. So we're both proliferating like crazy. We just had a big contract with India, and the kind of reactors we're building are breeder-type reactors, $182 billion worth for the Indian government. And of course, when we look at their public statements about liability, etc., and about special standards for building these reactors, the countries want to have better standards, not only nationally but internationally, because it's usually international corporations that come in and do the work. Just like in Japan, it's all basically American corporations, foreign corporations that are doing it in Japan. And the United States and Russia are blocking it. Tell us all about that. There's a 77-nation meeting in Vienna next month that's threatening to expose divisions over required safety standards. And this is coming up, so people need to be aware. And if you have any way of notifying the people that may be involved with this, it's called the Convention on Nuclear Safety, CNS. So tell us all about that.
Well, just I had chastised the IAEA for not having a plan or some sort of a convention prior to Fukushima. It looks like 3 or 4 years later they're going to actually try to have some kind of plans. I know we've been studying and implementing them here in the United States, and as we also said, the bean counters aren't going to like this because it's going to be very expensive. And in fact, we had already discussed that it caused at least 3 of the United States plants to say, you know what, that's it. We can't build this and meet these standards, and we're going to have to shut down. And they did. And that's like we said. There's going to be ripple effects. Now it looks like the companies in Russia and the United States are pushing back to the point saying, maybe they're beginning to equivocate on the amount of precautions that, and they're expensive precautions that would have to be built. And a lot of these precautions and modifications are things that we had talked about in our list of ideas and what you would do to either prevent something like that or mitigate something after it would happen.
Right.
So. And of course, it's going to come down to dollars and cents, and they're going to say, well, a lot of these older plants is going to take like the hardened vent, to be specific. I said, boy, that's not going to be cheap. And
right.
And we called it right here. I said, that's not. There's going to be a lot of whining about that, but it's something that needs to be done.
Exactly. In other words, it's a very simple checklist. It's not complex. The problem is who's going to pay for it. And here's what's happening with Obama. Obama has closed more coal-fired generators than anybody else in American history. He's also trying to he's trying to push forward what they call the green agenda of carbon agenda, and at the same time push nuclear reactors without increased safety standards. You don't hear Obama talking about increasing safety standards, and of course a lot of the reactors right now, like Diablo Canyon in Northern California or the New Madrid system or other areas, the standards are not there. And even when we do, they do a faux, for example, Taurus repair in Japan. This is years before the disaster. If they actually even had to have, let's say, 3 things. Number 1, a proper seawall. Number 2, those backup generators should have been a mile or more inland at a higher altitude so that they wouldn't get swamped. And number 3, they should have had proper containment systems to make sure that each reactor would have its own containment basin so it wouldn't lose the water, because it's sitting in an aquifer is what it is. And none of these things were done. It's basic.
It's sitting on an aquifer that drains into the ocean.
Exactly. And they didn't even put a seawall up on the other side to actually grab it and then turn that liquid radioactive waste to solid waste and then have it properly shipped away. The coming war with Kiev and so on. I know there's going to be a lot of saber rattling, but remember, all these movement of I call the little green men of war, is all because everybody's playing games for the world economy. It's the BRICS nations. And I'm going to just step back a bit. I've told people that I know exactly how they modify the world weather. And the way they do it is they insert paramagnetic molecules in the upper stratosphere between 73 and 80,000 feet. They're barium nanoparticles, thorium, strontium, and aluminum. And they hit them with plasma interferometry scalar waves from space-based scalar weapons platforms. And they're able to create weather systems that can steer the weather anywhere on the planet, trigger off earthquakes and volcanoes. So when you see a big snowmageddon storms strike the Northeast, it's because they permitted it or they didn't interfere with it. Or they caused it. Now, what does that have to do with this situation? What's going on right now is the plasma effects of Fukushima is changing world weather. We're starting to see some very weird weather around the planet caused by not only the Macondo drill site problem, which happened several years ago in the Gulf of Mexico, which destroyed the loop current, but we also now have Fukushima Daiichi and the plasma effects on the jet stream and the movement of oceanic waters. I mean, I talked to one of my surfer friends. They've never seen warmer waters than they have lately. Like last summer, the normal waters very rarely will get up to 70 degrees. They had 3 months when it was in the high 70s. It's never been seen before, never recorded before, and there's no reason but the oceanic currents are all changed. So when we're looking at Fukushima Daiichi, we're seeing the death of the coral off of Hawaii. We're seeing the intertidal region in British Columbia and the Queen Charlotte Islands along the coastal area. We're seeing radioisotopes that are popping over the poles and showing up 2.5, 3 years ago, showing up in Eastern Europe, and they thought it was a Chernobyl-style reactor. It's coming from Fukushima. But it also means all these other reactors in the world are not biosafe either. Every reactor on Earth is venting off tritium. Many of them are also venting off lots of other isotopes, like thorium and uranium and other isotopes in various amounts. And very few of them actually could withstand a large earthquake, a tsunami, or a power blackout because they don't even have enough backup fuel to last more than a matter of 2 to 6 weeks. So when we look at these basic standards of do they properly even X-ray or ultrasound their valves and their pressure test their lines and make sure that the pipes haven't eroded from neutron annealing because they have neutron flux or other factors causing destruction of the metal and the welds and the other things, the list is pretty long of things that they aren't doing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it just seems like anything they're trying to do, it doesn't seem like it's the complete answer, or they're not really going gung-ho and solving putting a lot of thought behind it, such as this, a storage facility to house the tons of contaminated soil. Remember now they have 1,000 tanks for the contaminated water. Now they're beginning to construct just this week the housing for the contaminated soil needs to be excavated up and to contain somehow. And I'm thinking, well, is this going to be a typhoon-proof structure? So after you scrape together all of the contaminated soil and you put it in one big location, will it all blow away and at the first sign of a typhoon and create a giant airborne problem? And I know some of your listeners say, well, why isn't he talking about the E&E article about the 6,000% cancer rate? That's right now. We already know that that's bad for you, and I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to say there are things that could be done to prevent, or could have been done to prevent that cancer rise, and and that's just really why I don't talk about that. But I'm really getting into more of the nitty-gritty and nuts and bolts of the project itself, and even the IAEA hasn't come. I know I sent you an article on that too. They haven't come to grips with the fact that this isn't a routine decommissioning. They're still calling it a decommissioning, and that's one of the articles I sent you. Well, they just don't get it, do they? This is not. This is a disaster mitigation site on grand scale. That's really what they have to start calling it that, or else they're really not going to attack it.
Right. Well, the problem is we're not doing what I call biosurveillance of the ecosystems of the Pacific. We have reports about people going across. Like 2 years ago, one gentleman was on the RENTS program, and he reported through another colleague his actual travel back and forth across the Pacific in a sailboat, and how this time all he saw was, when he got near northern Japan and the waters there, he saw basically no seabirds, a whale with a tumor on it, and a few other minor things. We know now that the orca killer whales in Puget Sound, basically there's no new baby killer whales that are older than a year now. They're basically not. They haven't survived. We know that the sea lion populations here along the California coast is disappearing. We know that these large seabirds up in the coast along British Columbia are disappearing, as well as even insects. Pelicans, which if you go along the coast here in California to go to Oceanside, to go to the Oceanside Pier, We have pelicans we've even named. But the regular oceanside, to go to the oceanside pier, we have pelicans we've even named. But the regular pelican populations here, the new pelican babies on the islands, let's say off Baja California, where there's usually 10,000 roosts where they're making new pups, new eggs are hatching, new little, pelicans, they're just not there. And people don't realize that this bioaccumulation in people is going to start having an effect. I can't tell you when. I'm preparing a paper to present to the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, and I talked to Dr. William Ray last year. They're often talking about other issues in healthcare and, bioaccumulation of regular toxins from the environment and pesticides and so on. Fukushima trumps it all. It's the biggest environmental disaster in human history. And I don't think people understand that.
Well, Dr. Deagle, the problem is that Kim Kardashian's backside gets more public attention and more press coverage than this creeping death in Fukushima.
Well, the problem is, and this is what disturbs me more than the regulatory agencies or the government or the media not taking action. I don't even get disagreeable people or scientists willing to call into the show at 800-259-5791 or emailing me and saying you're full of it. They don't want to start a dialogue because we can ask hard questions, demand science, demand surveillance, like when I talked about it 3 years ago, the idea of data logging radiation detectors, which you could simply have in every commercial airliner and build a plume map for the radiation, doing air and water sampling, food sampling along the coast at different points. We have, at our own expense, I set up a radiation station here for gamma detector for the marker radioisotope cesium-137, and I can look across my desk to my other desk, my roll top, with my computer screen set up with a radiation detector dedicated just to that measurement, and I can see 30 counts per minute rate this second. It's going to fluctuate, 28, 32. And if it spikes up, what I've discovered just from my own knowledge from looking at the other data sites, most of the radiation is heading north, crossing the Rocky Mountains at probably 26 to 30,000 feet is my speculation. It's not proven. Because we're not seeing much radiation here. It's getting in the ocean waters, but the ocean currents have dramatically changed. They're not the same as they were even 2 or 3 years ago. And we're not getting radiation. What's going across the U.S.-Canadian border, crossing the Rockies, heading down toward the Midwest, toward the food belt of the United States, the grain crops, corn crops, etc., zipping across and heading back up northeast. It's also going transpolar. It's going way over the poles to Europe and Russia and China. It's also going in all the coastal currents around the entire planet, and it only takes 26 months to circulate the planet. And it's also high altitude currents that carry it across the equator. Helen Caldicott said, well, no, don't worry, I'll get my relatives down from Boston to where she lives currently in Australia. I'm saying, Helen, it's only going to buy you some time because the fact is there's radiation been detected in eastern Australia. And yes, it's going to be a lot less radioactive in 10 or 20 years' time if this continues unabated. But the whole world is being poisoned. And it's not just this. Fukushima is a call to action to tighten standards around the world of nuclear sites to turn many of these nuclear reactors that are sitting on fault lines or tsunami zones into LNG, liquid natural gas generators, and to move to better and safer technologies, especially tokamak fusion technology, which the Chinese have now admitted they're going to develop, whether we like it or not. Our NSA, DARPA, etc., don't want people to know we've had fusion technology for 55 plus years, 60 years. So that's the reality, driven by demonic maniacs who really are trying to terminate the human race and most living things on Earth. Believe it or not.
Yep.